welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. This is That Time I Got Arrested, and here is the story of the first time I ever got arrested. If you've ever been curious about how someone's life of crime begins, this is my story. So hang on and enjoy. My name is B. Casper, and my entire life has been a lie. That's not even my real name. But don't worry, I'm going to tell you all of my secrets. This isn't the story of how I became an orphan. This isn't the story about how I jumped off a 5-story building and survived. This isn't about how I died and came back funny. This is that time I got arrested. It happened when I was 13, and it was a hard time in my life because my mother hated me. And she hated me because she didn't want to be a mother, and she really wanted to do drugs, and she wanted to date and be young and free. And who can blame her? Who can blame anyone for that? But when you have a kid, you have responsibilities, and she hated that, and she hated me because of that. And I think she hated my father. And so when you have parents that aren't together and they have one kid, you can kind of take out your frustrations with that other person who's not there on the person who is there, who looks and maybe reminds you of, that part of your life. So most important thing about this story is my mother hated me, because I feel like that explains how I even got into this situation in the first place. I was 13. I had no business being arrested. I had no business having any kind of interaction with police in any way, shape, or form. But they came to my house and they arrested me. And here's why. So my mom was dating this guy. He was a hairstylist in Beverly Hills, and he was bald, which I feel like the irony of that really explains the type of person that he was. He met me for the first time at a hotel in Newport Beach, and the first thing that he said to me was that he was a vampire. And the second thing that he said to me was that he was going to be better than my shitty father ever was, which was really not a good opener. That definitely, I kind of had a perma grudge against him after that. And my mom is a drug addict. My mom was a drug addict my whole entire life. All my mom ever cared about was drinking and doing drugs and doing whatever the fuck she wanted to do, which kind of respect for the commitment to how hard you're going to do you. But also that was my mom, and it would have been sort of chill if she gave a shit about me, even just the tiniest bit. My mom used to do terrible things. She would just leave me in places for hours and hours and hours. She would disappear for days or weeks or months at a time when I was a kid. And she had a terrible drug and drinking problem. When she drank, she would turn into a completely different person and get super violent and evil. And she did meth for 15 years. She was on heroin when I was a kid. She did crack up until she died. And that was who she was. I didn't know her favorite book or her favorite band or anything about, a person that makes them who they are. The thing that made my mom who she was how much she loved doing drugs. So she was with this guy, this hairstylist, and their relationship turned violent really quickly because my mom was really antagonistic. You see those women that are in abusive relationships and you're like, oh man, it's not your fault, you're the victim. But in my mom's situation, it wasn't really like that. She would get fucked up, she'd get drunk or high, and she would antagonize someone to the point where they would almost have to put their hands on her to get her out of their face because, I don't know, she was hit by a child. We're all hurt, so then we're all hurting people. It's never your fault, but also kind of what the fuck? So my mom and this guy would fight, and I was at an age where I didn't really understand the depths of her addiction. I just knew that she was sort of a fucked up person, but I also, I loved my mom until I was 15. It was kind of when I saw her for the first time, and I could separate, the feeling that you have as a child towards your mother and who that person actually is. And she was just a person. She was just a fucked up person. But this is when I still loved my mom, and this guy would hurt her, and I didn't understand that it was her addiction that was putting her in these situations. I would get really upset. So this guy was at my house, and my mom was there, and they were fighting. And they would fight, and it would be loud, and they would break stuff, and it would be scary. And I'm like 13, and I don't know, I think I'm a badass, I guess. I had a lot of confidence at this age because I had already seen and done a lot. So I wasn't afraid of this like 40-year-old man who was 3 times my size. And I went, into the room where they were fighting, and I tried to protect my mother. And I threw a candle at this guy's head. It's so funny. Everyone asked me when I was in juvie if the candle was lit. It wasn't lit. I don't know why they asked or why they wanted to know, but just in case you were wondering, the candle was not lit. And I threw it at his head. I broke a window. I mean, like, whatever. I was 13, it could have been a baseball, but instead it was a candle, and I was throwing it at my mother's abusive boyfriend. And our neighbors called the police on us, and they came to the house, and this was my first actual interaction with police on my own, where it wasn't like the adult was, talking or taking care of the situation. It was like they wanted to speak to me and treat me like an adult, I guess, which I didn't handle that correctly. I hid in my bathroom and made a big scene out of it. And a cop had to physically take me down, which I didn't know they were allowed to touch you. And I was kind of at that age, what the fuck? I was so shocked and scared and weirded out. And they gave me an opportunity to give my side of the story. And they were the enemy. So my side of the story was go fuck yourself. So they put me in the back of a cop car, and my mom lied and told them that I had hit her when really it was her boyfriend who peeled off before the cops even got there, and blamed the whole fight and everything on me. And the cops took me away. And since I didn't get a chance to tell my side of the story, by the time I knew what had happened, we were already on the way to the Juvenile Detention Center in Los Angeles, which is where I spent Memorial Day weekend when I was 13 years old. That was crazy, because the worst part about jail is that it's boring. It's not this scary, awful thing. I mean, trust me, it is. But really, the worst part is you are locked in a room by yourself with nothing and no one except your thoughts and the most recent experience, which was this huge fight with my mom and her bald hairstylist boyfriend. And when I finally got processed, which takes about, 12 to 20 hours of you just sitting and waiting around for them to fucking write your name and address down, because that's so fucking complicated. The amount I got processed, and then I get into where they house you or whatever, a cell, which is really a group of cells in separate parts of a big concrete building. And I was roommates. I was kind of normal looking and normal seeming in my life, despite the fact that I had this super traumatic and, chaotic upbringing. I was definitely the most normal chick in juvie in LA when I was 13. And my roommate was a bald lesbian skinhead. Yes, all 3 of those things were true. And she told me within the first 30 seconds of me being in that cell with her. And that was it. I was in there. Now it's 3, 4 in the morning, and she introduced herself to me, and I lay down and had a Reader's Digest to keep me company for the rest of the night. And I remember being so grateful at that point to have something to read, because I had just spent about 15 hours staring at the wall. Everything is made out of concrete. And everything, the walls and the beds and the doors and every inch of the jail is made out of concrete. The tables come directly from the ground, and as do the chairs, so that you can't pick anything up and hurt someone. There's always lights on 24 hours a day. There is a toilet that's made out of metal and a mirror that's not a real mirror. And yeah, all we had were Reader's Digest to read from, the early 80s. But juvie is not the same as real jail. There's definitely a sense of like calm and just innocence, really, even within the jail, that separates that experience from what it's like to actually go to prison, which is a really dark, insidious, like controlled place that is revolved around drugs and corruption. Juvie, my experience with juvie, my Memorial Day weekend in juvie was pretty tame compared to my experiences of being in actual adult prison. So the whole weekend, all we did were watch nature videos and read, whatever material they had available and eat, less than stellar food. And actually, this is really funny. My mom came to visit me during this weekend that I was in jail, and she would do this all the time. She would make up her guilt of being an awful mother and human being by buying me things. So though my mom bought me the one thing she could get me when I was in jail that would make that situation better, she brought me Jack in the Box like on Saturday evening, and that's what I got to eat for dinner. And all of the girls were so jealous and were kind of just like knowing at that point that my experience and their experience were vastly different, even though, I had a father who was in jail and I had a family that was a broken home, and my life had been very chaotic. Theirs had too, but there was always this like slight separation of the fact that like my mom had white, rich parents, and that sort of brought a sense of normalcy to my chaotic life. And that was like perfectly personified in the fact that my mom brought me chicken fingers and curly fries from Jack in the Box when I was in jail. She was probably getting high all weekend and having like the time of her life. And she was just thought that was like a really nice like gesture, that she could do for me, even though she was completely responsible for that experience that I was in. So she brought me Jack in the Box, and the rest of the weekend was really like a blur. I remember these girls that were my age and younger were talking about drugs and sex, and one girl was there because she took a car for a joyride, and I didn't even know what a joyride was. I was like, that sounds like you're having fun in a car. I'm like, is that a crime? I didn't know fun wasn't allowed. I mean, it's not, but... I didn't know specifically that you could get arrested for having just a little too much fun. But I didn't really like have a bad experience per se. I mean, it sucked to be there, but then it was almost like when I was out, which I got out Tuesday afternoon, I went to court and the judge sentenced me to anger management, which I never did. And that was it. I never heard about it again. Until, even the next time I got arrested, which was after I was 18. So that was interesting and weird because it was like it didn't matter. And it was an experience that made me feel like, oh, that's not so bad. Kind of like getting a tattoo for the first time. You think like, oh, I'll stick a bunch of needles in my skin attached to a gun? No, thank you. And then you do one and you're like, that wasn't that bad. I could probably do that again. And I didn't know that was the beginning of like a lifelong experience where I would just get arrested over and over again. And it meant nothing to me. And the first time I got arrested where I like wasn't allowed to leave within 24 hours was when I went to prison. And that meant something. That was awful. And this was the beginning of how awful that was. And what's weird is that I identified as having a criminal identity at that age. Like, I remember my application for boarding school, and on the application, it asked if you had ever been convicted of a crime. And I didn't know that I hadn't actually been convicted of a crime at this point. I thought that I had. I thought that I had a criminal record. No one told me that when you're 18 that stuff disappeared. And no one told me that it also didn't fucking matter after the fact anyways. So I kind of, felt like I was living on the edge since I was 13. I was on the edge of society and I was on the edge of life, and nothing else really mattered because I had already like ruined my good name. So making decisions later on in life to sell drugs and to be really reckless and, some might say psycho, but to make those decisions at a young age, I already thought that I had made them. And I think that that's what the prison system is designed to do. It's designed to make you feel like you're already a part of this machine that you can never escape. And you can't. When you get out of jail, when you get out of prison especially, you can't get an apartment. You can't get a job. You can't have a normal life again. They take all of that stuff away from you. And I have all of those things now, and I also haven't been arrested in 5 years, which I think is like really cool, pat in the back. So since I was like 13, this is the longest I've gone without any interaction with law enforcement. And that's really amazing. But that took me my whole life to figure out, because the first time you get put in that experience, the first time you get your freedom stripped from you and your dignity sort of like squashed in front of your face, that changes you forever. And it makes you think that up is down and right is wrong. And that's how it all started. Thank you so much for listening and for making it this far. If you're interested in being on the podcast, please reach out to me at thattimeIgotArrested@gmail.com. We are accepting submissions, and I'd love to interview you about that time you got arrested. You can also check us out on Instagram, That Time I Got Arrested, or you can check me out on Instagram, bcasper. And I would love to give a huge shout out to the most amazing podcast studio in Chicago, Jazz Buzz. Aaron from Jazz Buzz. If you have a podcast idea, please reach out to him and get it made. Thank you so much. Also, if you subscribe, 5 stars, all that stuff, it really helps the podcast out. And get out there, tell your friends, subscribe, do all that stuff. Thank you.